Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and we have had so much fun this year already, bringing you some insights and strategies and also tactics from inside the world of big business that you can apply to your small business for a real competitive advantage. And that's why today we've gone out and we've found someone who has been deep inside the strategic and tactical world of technology and information behind some of the biggest companies so that you can use it to grow your own business. Let me introduce you to today's guest. His name is Azunna Anyanwu. Azunna is the founder of the Agile CIO. He is an award-winning technology executive, servant leader, problem solver, and trusted advisor who provides strategic technology leadership to organizations. He assists clients with enhancing technology operations. If you're hearing that and thinking, I don't have technology operations, I have some tech, well, he's really going to guide us there, in addressing cybersecurity and IT operational gaps. With over 20 years of experience in IT operations, technology strategy, cybersecurity, business process re-engineering, and more, Azunna brings a unique and diverse technical skill set that has proven invaluable to his clients. How does he do all this stuff? Well, that's because he is a 3-time CIO and CTO, we're going to talk about the difference between those two, of top 100 accounting firms. He has served as the director of IT for a federal government contractor. He started his career in Big Four consulting, delivering technology solutions for both state and federal government clients. And he's got the academic background to back all this up. He's a graduate of Harvard University and the Johns Hopkins University with degrees in computer science. He also holds an MBA from the Quantic School of Business and Technology. We are all going to learn a lot. I love this guy's energy today, and I'm just going to reiterate, I say it so frequently on episodes, that not only is he amazing at all of these subject matter topics that we're going to talk about today, but he's also one of us. He's also a fellow entrepreneur, and that's why I'm so excited to chat with him today. So I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Azunna Anyanwu. All right, Azunna, I am so very excited that you're here with us today. First things first, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here myself.
Heck yes. I'm excited to hear your backstory because you obviously have been inside the world of big tech for quite some time now. Take us beyond the bio. Who's Azunna? How did you start doing all these cool things?
Oh, how did I start doing all these cool things? Well, funny story, right? I'm a child of immigrants. I'm a first generation American. And my parents wanted me to be a doctor. Right, so that's what I pursued for the better part of kind of the early part of my career, if you will, or kind of high school. And 10th grade, I took a computer science course. My academic high school was ahead of its time as far as I'm concerned in Washington D.C. and required every student to take a computer science course, and I took it. And to say I got the bug is an understatement, but I still struggled. Right, I was supposed to be this doctor, and here I am, really falling in love with computers, and so ultimately I ended up deciding to major in computer science and leave medicine behind, and study computer science at Harvard. And that was kind of the journey, right? I started as a software developer. I joined Big Four. I worked at Deloitte Consulting for 12 years. I did project management and enterprise architecture, a little bit of cybersecurity. So I got exposure to all these different disciplines. And, after one, I had not intended to make a career out of consulting. But two, I just kind of got to a certain point where I felt like I had so much value to give, and I wanted to give, in a different way. And so that's what led me to an internal role in IT, my first one, where I was a director of IT at a government contractor, and then back into the accounting space, right, which is kind of where I started. And so I've, as you noted earlier, been the CIO at multiple top 100 accounting firms. But the challenges of accounting firms, the challenges of a government contractor, right? All these firms were small and medium-sized businesses, anywhere from $56 million to $400 million. But they're the same challenges that I see when I go into organizations that are, say, $10 million in revenue.
Yeah, I love that, Azunna, especially because I love computers. I love technology in so many different ways, not only in my business life, but in my personal life. Home automation is my game. I absolutely love automating
Okay.
as many things as possible. But what I find, Azunna, is that people like you and I, when we get into computers at a young age, a lot of people try to pigeonhole us. You painted that picture of the
Yes.
contrast as kind of computer people or tech people. And that's why it really stands out to me. I love that distinction between CTO, Chief Technology Officer, and CIO, Chief Information Officer. Talk to us about that distinction, because it seems to me like you bring to the board not just the tech side of things, but also that really strategic, that business awareness understanding of how to make it help organizations actually flourish.
Absolutely. So while my brand is the Agile CIO, and I have an affinity for kind of technology operations. I'm kind of multi talented and versatile in that regard. So at I'll use the term, at a larger organization, your CIO typically is responsible for, as I said, Chief Information Officer, the technology operations. They make sure all your servers are running, your email systems work, your phone systems, people's laptops, right? The help desk. That's all part of your CIO's kind of scope of responsibility. Your CTO, and there's a newer title now, kind of in the industry, your chief. So CTO being Chief Technology Officer, or the newer title being a Chief Digital Officer. Again, just trying to elevate the role within the organization. Really is responsible for technology strategy. The idea is, how does technology enable the business? So beyond the nuts and bolts of now you have a computer, it's what systems do we need to introduce into the organization to make us better, right? So your CTO, for example, might drive your AI strategy, right? A lot of firms are talking about AI right now. Your CTO might implement major business systems. So maybe you want to change the way you do your manufacturing operations or your supply chain, or the way your ERPs, your HRIS, your HR systems, or your financial systems, right? Your chief technology officer, chief digital officer will drive those initiatives around automation and integration, right? So we live in a very interconnected world. There is no one system. Even as a small business, you probably find that, you need your Microsoft 365 or your Google Workspace, but you're still buying other things, right? You're buying an accounts payable system. You're buying a payroll system to pay your staff. So a CTO or CDO really is more so focused on, like I said, that strategic, how does technology help and assist the business, where your CIO traditionally is really more focused on making sure the underlying infrastructure, right, the plumbing, so to speak, that all of that relies on works.
Yeah, I really appreciate the way that you articulate that, Azunna. Especially, I want to read this for listeners because they know that obviously we do a lot of background on our guests before these conversations. And I really love the way that I saw you describe your company. You wrote, as a fractional CIO, I lend my expertise to small to medium businesses with addressing their technology challenges, both strategically and tactically. Now, Azunna, listeners know that I'm obsessed with that fine balance between strategy and tactics. I get it from the chess world. I absolutely love that chess saying that a grandmaster once said that tactics are knowing what to do when there's something to do, and strategy is knowing what to do when there's nothing to do. That, to me, that's like such a good way to explain it. But when I think about applying it to our businesses, especially in your line of work, I tend to look at, it's probably a different line of questioning that you ask. You ask yourself different strategic questions versus different tactical questions. What does that distinction and balance look like? Because obviously we need both sides of the coin.
We absolutely need both sides of the coin, and no offense to anyone who plays exclusively in the tactical area or in the strategic area. I think you have to be able to connect the strategy with the tactical, right? So as an example, if I spend all day as a CIO, and all I'm doing is keeping the lights on, right, but I'm not really providing value to the rest of the organization, I think in a lot of cases those organizations outgrow that individual, and they don't get the benefit of the true benefits of technology. It's like, no one's gonna. It's like a utility, right? I don't give credit to my utility company because the electricity runs. I expect it to, right, and I'm paying for that service. So as it relates to the strategy, right, I also don't want to live exclusively there. So I've run into organizations, I've come across organizations where they're like, yeah, high power consultant came in some period ago. They did a full extensive analysis, right? And they left me with 100-page deck. And then I'm kind of like, so what do I do with this, right? And it's like, all the warts, all the things they could kind of solve, but it doesn't give them a path to actually kind of do that. So I try to blend, the two. That's kind of like my secret power, if you will, right? Is being able to speak strategically to the board, to the executives, right? And then to connect the actions that I'm taking within the organization back to that strategy. So, as an example, the company might say, we want to grow, right? I had a client, and there was a desire for the organization to grow, and to grow specifically through acquisitions. And so I started to do an analysis of our systems and our processes to determine where were the pain points, where were the gaps, where were the things that would get overwhelmed with, a much larger organization. And it's very simple things. So, for example, for us, one of the things was the whole concept of onboarding. Right. So, we're onboarding 1 or 2 or 3 people at a time. And now I'm having to ask the question, okay, if we have to onboard 20 people, 50 people, 200 people at the same time, right? What would that do to our systems? What would that do to our processes? And so one of the recommendations I made to this firm was we need a better HRIS, human resources information system, because we had a payroll provider. So it was good at, making sure people got paid, but it didn't help us with anything else related to onboarding, right? So, somebody comes on board, and I'm not kidding you, there was a 100-item task flow across all the different departments, finance and IT and HR and just across the organization, where we're going into different systems to add that person's, create an account for that person. And I was like, no, this is not gonna serve us well and kind of scale. So that's an example of how I'm able to bridge the gap between strategy. We want to grow, we want to acquire, we want to be, a much bigger business, and a tactical, which is, well, in order to do that effectively, right, and not be crushed under the the weight of that growth, you really have to, have these systems in place, right? And it's not just about the technology systems. I'm very intentional when I say systems. It's even the processes. So sometimes your existing systems are good, but you have an inefficient process that you use around it, right? So it's a 3-step process, and it's supposed to be, maybe linear, but because 3 different people or 3 different departments are responsible, now you have this kind of weird bouncy thing where I have to get permission from you to do my job, right? You need to get permission or information from me to do your job, when it's like, well, if we collected all the information up front, then all of us could do our jobs more effectively.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Azunna, the thing that I love the most about that example that you just gave us is you started it by saying your client's words, which is, we want to grow. It seems to me like they didn't know what they didn't know. They just came to you with a problem and with a goal, obviously, and then you mapped that out in between. I find that us small business owners, I'm just as guilty as the rest of them, Azunna, in that if I see a cool technology, I'm a sucker for tech, I'll buy it and I'll figure out a way to put it into my tech stack. Not always the best solution. So what is the way that you address and attack these opportunities to really figure out, okay, here's where a new tech makes sense. Here's where leveraging your existing tech stack makes sense. How do you even begin that? Because obviously you kind of alluded to it, that understanding the goal or the problem is the first step, but I'd love to hear that roadmap of how you make these decisions along the way.
Yeah, I'm all for new tech, and it's very interesting. So I'm definitely not anti-tech, right? I'm in the technology field, but I'm a big believer that technology is an enabler and it has to make sense, right? It's a means to an end. And far too often I see clients that, to your point, get attracted to that shiny object and just want the tech because, it seems cool, right? But they don't really understand the problem that it's kind of solving. So I do 2 things to really help, my clients avoid the shiny object syndrome, as I kind of call it. The first thing is I help them develop a view, a roadmap, as it were, of their current systems. What do you currently have, right? In a lot of cases, in I don't think I've seen a single case where I've gone into an organization and they knew exactly all the systems, right? Somebody over there put something on a credit card, another person put it on their personal card, right? It's not even on a corporate thing, but it's a system. It's being used by this one department or this one person. So the first thing I do is really, kind of say, let's understand all the systems that are here that you currently have before we go out and kind of go buy the next one. The next thing related to that is now that you know what the systems are, right? I try to, essentially do an analysis. And this is a very structured, methodical, systematic process that I kind of go through. What are the capabilities of each of these systems? Because unfortunately, there is a bit of overlap, right? So, very practical example. If you've got a Google subscription or a Microsoft subscription, it has a calendar scheduling feature, right? And then there's Calendly, right? It has Teams or Google Chat, right? And then there's Zoom. And so many organizations don't know why they have gone out and bought, so and so, right? It's because it's got a big name, and in certain cases it does make sense. The capability, especially in those purpose-built systems, tends to exceed whatever is built into the core platform you have. But in a lot of cases, they didn't even know what's there. And it's like, oh, I could save money and reduce the complexity of my tech stack by going with this. But everybody uses X, Y, and Z. Well, that's not true. Everybody doesn't use X, Y, and Z. So first things first, what are the systems you have in your organization? Second thing is really creating that kind of, visual of, okay, this system does these three things and this system does these other three things. And oh, by the way, there's an overlap between those two systems. And then, frankly, I try to plug the gaps. Because while there's a desire for new shiny things, in a lot of cases, the organization isn't unaware, right, as part of this exercise, where I'm like, hey, did you know you could do, say, process automation in the way that you onboard your clients? You could do process automation in the way that you do your billing and invoices. So now you're not having to call people, to get them to kind of pay. And they're like, wow, I didn't know that, right? And it's like, yeah, that's probably going to be far more valuable to your business at the stage it is today than you going off and buying that, nice new kind of shiny AI object. So, and then the third step in that is really to give them that roadmap, right? So again, I'm not against, roadmaps, but I want them to be actionable. And so I'm giving them a prioritized list and saying, from my perspective, this is what I would work on next, right? Based on where you are, based on where you want to go, based on what you currently have and don't have. My recommendation is we might want to consolidate these systems, right? That'll save you some money. That'll reduce the complexity of the tech stack. Then, the next thing is I think you should go implement this system, right? And that system will give you this additional kind of capability, and they kind of build and block. It's like I said, it's methodical, but it's still quick, right? So in a lot of cases, these systems are well known. They're pretty well established, right? I mean, every firm is dealing with, pretty much the same thing, right? Cash to close, procure to pay, whatever, however how your business is organized. And so those are the systems that you kind of need, and then it's okay. Now I have a framework in which to evaluate new systems, right? So now somebody comes to me and says, hey, Azunna, I just ran across this tool. It's super great, right? I'd love to buy it. And I have a framework. I know what we have. I know what the capabilities are. I know what the gaps are. I know where we're going from a roadmap. And I can look at that in light of all of these things and make a recommendation and say, yeah, this is a great thing, right? Are you willing to prioritize it over these other things? Sure, let's do it. You're not willing to prioritize it over these other things. I think that should hopefully tell you something, right? Because there's only so many resources, so many dollars, so much time, so much people, kind of energy. So making sure that they understand that, so that they're not. I've seen far too many clients, unfortunately, go off, buy the shiny object. Now they're in the hole, for a 3-year contract. They're in the hole for tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they've essentially bought a system that doesn't meet their needs, and that constrains them from being able to make the investments that actually will help them, improve.
Yeah, Azunna, hearing you say that, it really makes me personally want to do a systems, tech, and workflow audit. And I think hearing the way that you approach these things, I think those three things have to go together. Is we can't just assess our tech stack. I actually get emails from listeners all the time that they say, hey, I'm looking at my tech stack. Should I go all in on Notion? Should I go all in on ClickUp or all the various project management tools out there? But you're changing my answer. I'm just going to send them this clip from that one answer that you gave us, because it has to start there. It really starts with a business, with the goals, with the objectives, as well as with your existing systems and processes and workflows. That's the big thing. It's funny, whenever I have someone who's super techie on the show, it's funny how frequently we end up talking about non-technical things because the technology should just enhance it. So I really appreciate that perspective. But Azunna, I am going to go somewhere that you brought up because we have to talk about it here in 2025. And that is, of course, the shiniest of all the objects, and that is AI. We all know AI can for sure enhance what we're doing, but not everybody has yet figured out how the heck is it going to enhance what we're doing. How do you even begin to approach that topic with your clients? Because there's infinite possibilities with AI. I love that notion of we're only limited by our imagination now. How do you sit down with clients and help them make sense of it?
Yeah. My strategy to AI is I don't want to be bleeding edge, and that's a personal decision. That's a bit of my training in terms of kind of my background and the organizations in which I've kind of worked before. And so the idea really is I don't want to be on bleeding edge. I don't want to be on cutting edge of AI. I want to be a fast follower. So I want to be aware of kind of what's going on from the AI perspective, and then understanding where I can embrace it. Here's the big thing about AI or anything, right? Before AI was blockchain. Before that, it was robotics process automation or machine learning or any number of technologies that have kind of come and gone over the years. 5G was going to revolutionize the world, right? So the question for me is always, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? So, for example, I know this fantastic AI timekeeping software that is really helping. They're really focused on the legal and the accounting space, and firms to make the best use, right? Because I mean, again, it's a time-based business, right? So I bill you a certain number of hours to create that tax return. I bill you a certain number of hours to create that deliverable, whatever that might be, right? And so that tool is allowing firms to gain insight. Right? Why did Johnny take 10 hours to do that when Susie took 6 hours? Right? What's the difference in the way that they work that can kind of give you that insight? So if that's an issue for your organization, right? Your professional services of some sort, you're doing time and billing, that's a practical usage of AI, right? And I'll compare that with, say, ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot. Nothing against it, right? They're both great tools. But it's okay for you as an organization to say, we're going to experiment, right? We're going to invest in a pilot, right? I've been part of organizations that have done that, and we'll pilot these tools where now it truly is an experiment. We're trying to see, can it help our people work differently? Well, no two people are going to embrace it the same, right? Some are going to be a little bit skeptical of it. Some of them are going to go all in, right? Maybe too far in some cases. And some of them are going to, but the idea behind that is we want to gain the insights from, in this case, generative AI in terms of, how that kind of applies. So for me, AI has to be purpose built. It has to be a means to an end. It can't be AI for AI's sake. And so, like I said, whether it's that timekeeping, I was on another site the other day, and they had a chat bot that was clearly powered by AI. And I thought it did a much better job than the previous chatbots. I actually added it to my list of my tech stack. I'm always interested in learning new technology and bringing it to bear for my clients, right? So I added that kind of to my list. But it's like, okay, what's the problem that I'm trying to solve, and how can, or are there AI solutions that can assist in addressing that? And if that's the case, by all means, go kind of adopt it. But my advice is avoid the shiny object. So there are many people that Microsoft Copilot now is included in some subscriptions, for example. And so if you don't use it, you don't get the benefit of it, right? If you don't know when to use it or why to use it or where to use it, you don't get the benefit of it. So the real benefit is, I needed to solve this problem. And there are specific problems that it does solve, and solve very well.
Yeah, Azunna, hearing you talk about your own tech stack and you kind of have that running list of, hey, this is cool, let me analyze it at some point in the future. Yeah. I want to go there with you because I would imagine that all of your past experiences in big business, I mean, we're talking some of the biggest accounting firms on planet Earth and literally globally, and you've been inside of their departments running these huge projects. Now you're a fellow entrepreneur, and I would imagine that plays into the way that you view your own business. I would imagine it actually enhances the way that you work with fellow small to medium-sized businesses now. How's that all factor into your entrepreneurial, your executive mindset these days?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yes, I'm a small business, right? And so, it's been an interesting kind of journey for me because the first 20, 25 years of my career, I've done this as kind of an employee within an organization. And so now I'm, taking my own advice, so to speak. And so I'm very, as I mentioned, methodical kind of earlier. So before I started the business, or as part of starting the business, I really, and I touched on this earlier, that word systems. I thought to myself, what systems do I need and when do I need them? So I was kind of like, okay, I need obviously some sort of financial accounting, general ledger system. There are a number of them: QuickBooks, NetSuite, Sage, you name them, right? Xero. So I was like, okay, so I did some research around those, right? Obviously, I needed a tech stack to support email and collaboration and the like. I did an analysis between Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace and picked a tech stack. But I was very intentional, right? System by system, right? As an example, I now have payroll, so kind of my business is growing, thank God. But when I first started, I didn't have payroll; it was just kind of me, and then I just kind of drew money. So I was like, okay, on my list is I need to have some sort of HRS or payroll system for when I start to kind of hire people and start to kind of go through that place. So again, the same kind of approach that I took, right? I used that example, and it was very intentional. Around the different systems that are out there. I call them point solutions that do something very well. And so I'd compare that to whatever was built into the systems that I currently did. And if it made sense for me, I would pay for it. I would buy it and know that it's duplicative, but there's a specific reason why I bought that one. And in other cases, I was like, no, the built-in thing to Microsoft or Google or whatever is just as good. And so I'm going to stick with that for now. And, the other thing is just because you make a decision as an organization today, you're making a decision given the parameters and the unique constraints of today. Right. And so that could change tomorrow. So, if I did an evaluation and determined that, Zoom wasn't a good fit for me now because, I'm just one person, but maybe I'm 100 people, and I see that a lot of my clientele are, more have a strong preference or affinity for Zoom. We can't take it for granted that everybody's tech savvy, right? Zoom is kind of synonymous with video conferencing. So when you have to get on a Google Meet or even a Teams, right? People are kind of like, I don't know how to use this thing, and it's like the same thing, but I get it, right? It's different technology. So my point is, what might work for me today, right? A good example is even that, going back to that HRS example, what will work for me as a 10 to 50 person organization is probably going to be a much different HRS that's going to work for me as a 2,000 or 5,000 person organization. So it's okay to make that decision and then revisit, I'd say every 2 to 3 years.
That's an interesting point, Azunna, and somehow we've not talked about timing here in our conversation today, but I don't know if it's supposed to be a knock on entrepreneurs. I take it as a badge of honor, that saying that entrepreneurs, we jump off the cliff and build the parachute on the way down. And I think how many times in my own 17-year entrepreneurial career that I've just figured it out in the moment, Azunna. I had no idea what I was facing. My first hire, I didn't have any HR systems. I didn't even know I needed HR systems, but I inevitably figured it out. What is that delicate balance of figuring things out in advance before we need them versus saying, hey, it doesn't make sense to invest resources or time or money into solving a problem that I'm not facing today? We'll get there when we get there. How do you balance that out?
I love, and that's why it's a core part of my brand, right? So there was an Agile manifesto that was put out in, if I recall correctly, 2001, and it was for software, right? And since that time, it's been expanded into other industries, right? There are kind of lean standards, for example, lean manufacturing that Toyota optimized back in the 80s. And so the answer to that entrepreneur is, as you identify the need, note it down. So I literally have a business operations note, right? That I kind of keep track of, and it talks about, at some point I know I need to have an administrative hire, right? So I'm not dealing with the books, or I'm not dealing with the follow-ups and all those kinds of things. But for now, it's just, it's a kind of a drag on my business, so to speak, right? So, but there's that point, but I've kind of identified it, and that's as far, right? I've just identified that, and I'm constantly talking to other entrepreneurs, I'm talking to other businesses, I'm asking curious questions, and so as they tell me things, I'm adding it to my list. I'm like, oh yeah, you need somebody to do that, or you need a process for that, or you need a system for that, right? And I'm kind of adding it to my list. And so getting back to the Agile, the idea is really just in time planning. So I've got a long-term roadmap. I have some ideas of where I want to be, 3 years or 5 years. I have no clue, zero clue. And any firm that says that they have an exact idea about, how they're going to get from A to Z, I think is probably kind of lying to themselves, right? Who predicted the tariffs, right? And all the things that are kind of coming, or a pandemic, right? Kind of taking place in organizations. So that agile mindset of just-in-time planning is one that I apply even in my business, and certainly apply to kind of my clients, right? You will have the plan, you will have a good idea of where the things are. Like I said, as your trusted advisor, bring them to me. I'll make sure that they're kind of reflected and incorporated. And the idea is that we should be revisiting that, right? Quarterly, twice a year, once a year. What is the plan? How does technology enable? Is this the right time to make those changes, right? And certainly as you get closer to some of those milestones, you start to put in additional effort in terms of that plan, right? So I know I need to hire kind of an administrative person. And then now you're starting to think, okay, what are the things that would trigger, right? Oh, well, when I'm spending more than 15% of my time doing this, or when it becomes so burdensome, or where it's starting to maybe impede growth. And we're not going to get it right, right? We're not perfect. We're not, mind readers or future tellers by any stretch. But just having that kind of gut feel of, I know I need it. And then the question is, am I doing that a little bit too early, a little bit too late, or kind of just in time? But if you identify it, doesn't mean that you have to. That's probably the biggest advice that I can kind of give to firms is like, it's a great idea, but is it a now idea or is it a future idea? And if it's a future idea, let's put it on a roadmap. Let's start to noodle over it, right, unconsciously and consciously over the period to figure out, when is the right time to pull on that lever.
Yeah, Azunna, I'll tell you what, hearing you talk here today, Agile, obviously it's in the name of your company, but it's also very much in the way that you see the world and the way that you operate your business. And I will say, as someone who has had the great pleasure of interviewing you here today, I would imagine that's why you're so grounded. That's what really stands out to me about the way that you show up in the world is your groundedness. And when I think about what being agile means, I realize your attitude, of course you're grounded because you're not afraid of whatever tomorrow presents, because you just trust yourself and your systems and your thought processes and your intentionality. I want to interject that as well, that you're going to be able to adjust your sails and keep going in the direction that you want to keep going in. So I very much appreciate that. You said that asking ourselves, is this a now problem or a future problem, is one of your best pieces of advice, but I'm going to put you on the spot because I do it at the end of every single episode. And I'm going to ask you for your one biggest piece of advice for fellow entrepreneurs, knowing that we're being listened to by both entrepreneurs and wantrepreneurs at all different stages of their own growth journeys, and also knowing that you're not just the subject matter expert that you are, but you're also a fellow entrepreneur. What's that one piece of advice that you want to leave our listeners with today?
The one piece of advice for fellow entrepreneurs, and I can speak as one who never wanted to be an entrepreneur. That was never part of my plan. That was never. I would say embrace the journey, right? There's a kind of meme and a graphic that shows the life of an entrepreneur, and it's kind of like, up and down. And I've had that, right? I've had days I'm panicking, like, I don't know where my next check's coming from. And then I've had other days where it's like, oh, wow, I just found two things and now I don't know how to deliver them. So for me, the biggest piece has been to embrace all of it, right? Recognizing that, I'm going to get better through it. Right. I'm going to grow through it. I'm going to learn some things about myself in terms of my capabilities that I didn't know. So that's the biggest thing for me. It's like, it was a commitment, right? So I've talked to a few people about this, and I was like, this is not just maybe a knee-jerk reaction or like I said, a desire to fire my boss and be my own boss, right? It was an intentional. I think that I could do what I've been doing, but serve the firms that frankly have not been able to afford someone like me, right? So if you're a big business, you're a large multinational, you can hire 1,000 Azunnas through any of kind of these big firms, and here's a small and medium-sized business, right? That could use the benefit of a technology advisor or strategic. And so that's really the space that I've stepped into kind of intentionally. And so as long as there's a business problem and a need that you're solving, I would say embrace the challenge.
Yes, Azunna, that is also a natural segue for the fact that there are so many people out there, and literally any challenge that we're facing in our entrepreneurial growth journeys, there's so many people that can help us overcome those obstacles, and they help us do that through their own experiences, through the projects that they've worked on, through the successes that they've seen both personally and with their clients. So Azunna, on that topic, I'm so appreciative that these days you are serving small and medium-sized businesses, taking everything you've learned. So for listeners who want to get in touch with you and check out all the great work that you're doing, drop those links on us. Where should listeners go from here?
Sure. So my name is Azunna Anyanwu. So you can follow me on LinkedIn. That's my major platform that I'm on. And the website is theagilecio.net. So THEAGILE CIO.net. From there, you can contact me. You can see some of the examples of work that I've done. And I'd love the opportunity to kind of work with your, small to medium business, regardless of the size, right? I have a colleague, ex-friend that worked with me at a company and now has his own kind of talent agency, and he reached out to me for support, right? So, I don't know if there's anything kind of too small in terms of me being able to do both project-based work as well as kind of like ongoing support and advisory kind of support work.
Yes, I love that. And listeners, you already know the drill. We're making it as easy as possible for you to find those links, including Azunna's personal LinkedIn. If you just want to continue the conversation with him and talk about your business, your tech stack, your problems, your goals, any and all of that, you hear how open Azunna is. Him and I were joking off the air about the fact that he wasn't prepped with anything here today. And that's kind of the beauty of the show, is we go where the conversation takes us, and you see how comfortable he is in all of these topics because he's lived it. He's not just talking about it from theory, whether it's his own career or his own business, and all the clients that he has helped and that he is helping. Unleash those powers inside of your own business. Check those links down below in the show notes, no matter where it is that you're tuning into today's episode. Otherwise, Azunna, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks, Brian. It's my pleasure. Really appreciate it.